Okay, I believe we are now recording. So hi, everybody. This is the January 19th Broadband Ready statewide call. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We have a very full agenda. If you feel comfortable, please put your name and your team or region or kind of university affiliation in the chat, just so that if people want to kind of connect offline, they know who to contact, or even during this presentation, if you want to chat with people. Certainly, I like to have a kind of engaged session, even with the chat that people have, and kind of use that as another venue for people to kind of communicate or ask questions, since we have so many excellent team members from the Office of Broadband and Illinois Broadband Lab on this call that can also respond to things faster than me, kind of conducting this presentation. So we're going to go ahead and get started. This call is a little bit different than our other Ready calls because we were supposed to be in the middle of our regional engagement tours, but the weather and the roads of Illinois certainly threw a monkey wrench into those plans. Ice storms, university closures, extreme wind chills, maybe much to be expected in January, but that was the timeline we were working with the State Digital Equity Plan. So as one response to that is that this time will be a very condensed version of a lot of the material that would be covered in those regional engagement calls. Now, I should still note that we are still meeting in person in a couple different regions next week. So Tuesday, we will be in the southeast region at Eastern Illinois University. On Wednesday, we're going to be in Carbondale. Thursday, there's a listening session for the State Digital Equity Plan in Aurora. And then Friday, we're aiming to be in Rockford for the Northern State Line region. And then followed potentially next week on the 30th, actually, it's looking like that's coming together for the East Central region with UIUC. So the second half of the tour, again, barring extreme weather, will still take place. So if you are new to this call and in any of those regions, as we'll talk about, the opportunity is still there. So you're welcome to kind of listen lightly, since a lot of this will be repeated at those in-person sessions. But we wanted to provide an opportunity to the North Central region, the Southwest region, and the West Central region that all saw cancellations due to weather this week. So this is the agenda. I'm going to be talking quickly, but hopefully enunciate and be comprehensive enough to get through this massive agenda, and kind of make it satisfactory for everybody that's on this call, and hopefully answer a lot of questions and guide people in the right way. Again, please utilize the chat feature. If you have specific questions, one of my team members can kind of jump on and answer it faster than I can going through these different things. So if you're new to the Broadband Ready program, you're wondering what it is. It's how the Office of Broadband and the Illinois Broadband Lab are kind of coordinating their regional engagement for both digital equity and broadband infrastructure efforts. The long-term goal ultimately is to create digital inclusion ecosystems through regional collaboration, meaning taking best practices from different places in the region, learning from one another, making sure that, for example, county broadband managers in a particular region have a point of contact either through the Office of Broadband or a university, as they sort of navigate broadband funding or different digital equity initiatives. So this is a grant-funded program where money goes to support digital equity impact projects, usually through university hubs, as well as to help support these kind of regional collaboration efforts. If you're curious which region you belong to, we follow the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunities regional divisions, based on counties listed here to the right. So if you're new and from one of these counties, you can kind of identify which region and which associated university main institution of higher education is leading that region. This is a broad scope of work drill down, kind of the main components, I would say, of the READY program as it exists in its current state. So attending these meetings, and each region has their own meeting as well, is a big part of it, that collaboration project. Each region is also working on a specific digital equity impact project. That sometimes means coordinating device donation events. It might mean doing special ACP outreach and coordination efforts. It might be specific dashboards. So if you were to join these ready teams, that would be an opportunity to kind of learn what that's about. In April and May, we're going to be doing a little bit more of a collaborative report out as to what different teams are working on, what they've had success with, what challenges they've had as we enter the new fiscal year come July 2024. And then lastly, that piece, that regional digital equity coalition building, I think is another strong part of the READY program, particularly that last bullet point, that bi-directional communication on all different things happening with broadband. So 2024 is arguably going to be the busiest year just in terms of actual dollar movement when it comes to broadband and digital equity, as digital equity grants from a federal and state level will be rolling out, in addition to Further Connect Illinois infrastructure grants and BEAD grants, the infrastructure grants coming from the federal government. So all of it requires a lot of coordination. There's going to be a lot of questions as people kind of submit grants. So helping with that process is definitely a priority of the BEAD program. Another big part of the BEAD program is the Digital Navigator Core. Anita Thomas Lee is helping lead this project, working on digital literacy curriculum and ACP outreach events. We're trying to kind of have representation in each of these regions. So if you have specific questions about digital navigation or ACP sign-up events or those sorts of things, I recommend sending a message over to Anita Lee in the chat, and she can kind of provide some updates on that program and everything happening there. Really quick glance at the meeting schedule. So I mentioned each READY team has a regional meeting, and then there's this statewide call. A quick note here for everybody on here, they typically happen the third Fridays of the month, like today. But because of a variety of circumstances, we're moving next month's call up a week so that it'll be February 9th. This is mostly due to the Net Inclusion Conference, which is happening the 13th through the 15th. So if anyone's not familiar, one of our big partners in this space is the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, NDIA. If you're unfamiliar, you should check them out. They do really, really fantastic work and are the national leader when it comes to sort of coordinated digital equity efforts. And they do a big conference every year. And this year's conference is happening over Valentine's Day, that period in February in Philadelphia. Many of our staff members are going. I hope some of you consider going and maybe see you there. But because of all of that, we're moving the call up next week in February. And then we should resume the normal schedule in March when that happens. Okay, I'm going to keep going again. I'm going to slow down at some points and check the chat, but just because given the content that we're trying to get done today with this condensed call, trying to get a 2-hour meeting basically into one, we're just going to move quickly. Anybody that's new, that's thinking, hey, I might want to get involved in my region's READY team. This is just a general outlook of when they have their meetings. Part of this in-person regional tour that we're doing is to help spread the word about the READY program and potentially identify key partners and regional collaborators that might want to join the READY team. So if you're curious, whether it would fit into your calendar and how you'd want to, I just wanted to put this slide up there. And also for any of the team leads that are on today's call, just to kind of check in and make sure that still works for you all. And if not, we can kind of coordinate. I did put an asterisk next to a few of these dates just because depending on certain events or conflicts, we might have to kind of move those sessions around. I would say, for those on the call that are team ready leads, I think expanding the team and expanding the participants on those regional calls is certainly a goal for the months ahead before the kind of end of the fiscal year, June 30th, just getting a little bit more active role from different parts of the region on those calls. So it'll, I think, be even more important that this consistency gets set and that more people are invited to join. In addition, I always just like to kind of mention that there are other opportunities to be involved with. I know many on this call participate in these. The ACP outreach call that happens on the third Thursday. So there was one yesterday. The next one is scheduled for February 21st. Ignore that reconvening in January note. This is an opportunity to kind of discuss what's happening with ACP, which there's a lot of news around around it wrapping up. What's the plan going forward? I just like to note, and as we talk about ACP and the future, to consider it more in the lens of what do we actually just mean by affordability opportunities. If it does mean ACP or if it means other types of benefit or identifying low-cost internet options for people, to me, that all kind of is wrapped up in the same thing. And so I think that's what that call kind of will also sort of transition to in the future as well, is how do we coordinate to ensure that there are affordable options for Illinois residents and that they are aware of those opportunities. Other main one here is just the formerly what was known as the statewide digital equity call. We're renaming the Illinois monthly digital equity updates. Those are the first Fridays. So the next one will be February 2nd, 1 to 2. This is an opportunity, I think it's a little bit more geared toward practitioners, meaning those working in often nonprofit or community-based organizations that specifically deal with digital equity. It's an opportunity to kind of talk with folks, hear what's going on, get some advice, and really just have an opportunity and space for people to get on the same page when it comes to specific digital equity work. So if you know that that's the area that you're in or you're a representative of one of those groups, we highly recommend joining that call, especially because there's going to be more and more kind of grant deadlines and opportunities and messaging that needs to be going out as the Digital Equity Act gets implemented this year. If you're curious, what does the calendar generally look like for the Broadband Ready program? We are in that kind of short-term area still around really trying to grow participation in the region and kind of do that general outreach. So I know that's the task before the Illinois Broadband Lab and Illinois Office of Broadband in February, is to, now that we've sort of gotten ourselves relatively organized for this tour and kind of identifying who some of the key people are, organizing that in such a way so that this sort of regional engagement piece, this regional collaboration, can happen a little bit more smoothly. Again, particularly as we enter a stage of really important communication, bidirectional communication happening with a lot of deadlines and frankly, kind of confusing information as it relates to broadband grants and the BEAD program. Long-term or midterm view, it's really about connecting with people in your region, furthering your digital equity impact projects, and then eventually, I think, really starting kind of to weave this picture of Illinois, both in terms of data sharing and others, so we can kind of really get a sense of what is the state of digital equity, highlighting best practices, and kind of using data, I think, to really understand which tools and resources can be most effective and kind of quickly implemented or scaled statewide as we kind of continue to chip away at the digital divide and digital inequities in the state. For just a kind of brief example of what we're kind of eventually hoping to kind of see with each Ready team in each region, is universities basically having a seat at the table, helping especially on that digital equity impact project, but also sort of being one seat amongst a table in which you have different regional members participating, helping one another, and sort of being that convening role so that when information needs to get out quickly, someone, a sector-specific person can say, I have connections with these different regional offices or these different counties to make sure that they're aware of this opportunity specific to this region. That's kind of the long-term goal. So think of it as kind of a diverse regional table dedicated toward these issues of digital equity and broadband. Again, apologies for perhaps talking quickly, but just a lot of information we want to get across. And as always, you can kind of put things into the chat. So we're going to shift gears now into the sort of highly condensed presentation that we were going to give to these different communities at our regional engagement events. And that is really the big announcement that the state digital equity plan, the draft of it, has been released. It is now accepting public comments from everybody that wants to across Illinois. These will be kind of condensed and brought into consideration before the final plan is submitted to the NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, who will then kind of approve it, which will then unlock digital equity funding. So this is really the last chance to kind of weigh in on what you want to see the state of Illinois, what direction you kind of want to take or have the state take with regards to digital equity. The public comment period closes at the end of this month, January 31st. So you have to get your comments in this month. They'll be incorporated, and then the plan will be submitted to the feds in mid-February for approval. And then that'll be the baseline for obviously the goal and trajectory of Illinois, as well as how it anticipates on spending some of the funding. So this is an example of the agenda that we would give for these regional sessions. So kind of imagine this would be the start of more or less a 2-hour presentation. This is what it would kind of entail. I'm going to essentially do a lightning round and hopefully not turn too many people away or overwhelm people. What I do want to say is really quickly, sorry, going ahead. This page here, you can submit public comments there. We have a link at goillinois.edu/DEPlanComments. And if anyone on my staff wants to kind of put it in there, you are welcome to basically look at the digital equity plan while I'm speaking, maybe jot down some notes if you want to submit public comments. I also want to note the state is happy to receive positive comments of things that you enjoy or think are good about the plan. It doesn't necessarily just have to be areas of improvement or identifying things that are lacking. They would also take positive feedback, but all feedback in general to submit to the NTIA. So again, because I think we're going to forego that breakout session time, I just wanted to make sure people are aware of the opportunity to basically, as I'm speaking, just kind of see that form, which we will talk about a little bit more in depth before we go. Okay. This is the definition of digital equity from the federal government, from NTIA, that it actually codified into law. And so if you've been on statewide digital equity calls or you've been on this READY call, often we ask and have a collaborative kind of conversation around what does digital equity mean. I don't think there is one right answer or anything, but I do think it is relevant just to acknowledge what the federal government has identified, and in particular, recognize what I would consider an achievement this legislation was at the time that got passed in 2021, and some of the language that Congress asserted. Things like digital equity, you know, I put 2 quotes down there. Digital equity is necessary for civic and cultural participation, employment, lifelong learning, and access to essential services. The idea that Congress actually passed this into law with these definitions, I think, is a monumental achievement for anybody that works in the digital equity space, to have that recognition from the federal government, particularly because in other states, and fortunately not Illinois, equity is almost seen as a bad word. And so they don't even call their plans digital equity plans. They use terms like digital opportunity. And obviously there are political reasons behind this sort of thing. So I, you know, just at a personal level, I'm glad that Illinois leans into digital equity, as I think it should. And the reason why I keep this slide up there for people is just as you might consider grant funding opportunities, yes, specifically for digital equity, but also for other things that either your university or your organization is applying for, just keep in mind that you can kind of quote or reference the Digital Equity Act in your applications to say, look, you know, it's not just our opinion saying this. The federal government has actually kind of laid out in legislation the importance of digital equity, particularly in other sectors of our society, whether it's you know, employment, education, justice issues, accessing essential services, and the like. So this is important, I think, not just for digital equity grant funding, but other types of funding, and just explaining or justifying your work in other sectors. Okay. Related to the funding, the Digital Equity Act provides two main funding programs. So this is kind of what's going to be explained in further detail in 2024. But there's two main kind of buckets. One is a state capacity grant program that Illinois, the Office of Broadband, will be running. Information about that is included in the State Digital Equity Plan. But there's also a competitive grant program that you can see project funding administered by the federal government, by NTIA. And just as for a ballpark figure, Illinois expects to receive 30 to 35 million to fund its state capacity grant program. I also want to put a huge kind of note here that if people are familiar with the Digital Equity Capacity Kickstarter program, the DEC program, part of the reasoning Illinois went ahead and did that program was to kind of, one, bridge the gap because that the DEC program I think started in 2022, and these dollars won't start rolling until 2024, but also to kind of get used to that process and get people prepared so that knowing that this kind of amount of money was going to be following the DEC program basically allowed the state to kind of prepare as well as applicants for that process so it can kind of run smoothly so that we're not just kind of starting with this federal money at first. So this is another example, I would say, of Illinois being a little bit ahead of the game as opposed to other states by having these opportunities. Other states, it's like this 2024 is the first time, for example, the state is doing any type of direct investment with digital equity. So I hope that also provides context. We'll talk a little bit more about the DEC program because it is still accepting applications until January 22nd. So if you have questions about the DEC or the release of those funds, please just kind of put that in the chat and we'll go there. Okay. This should also be familiar to anybody that is in the space working on digital equity, but it's important enough, I think, to warrant a slide because this is ultimately the sort of orientation for the entire Digital Equity Act, and therefore it's very relevant to the state of Illinois' Digital Equity Plan, which is the covered populations which have been historically unable to fully engage in the digital economy. So again, as you either as a representative of Ready through a university are thinking about engaging with your populations or seeking grant funding or looking to make collaborations with different departments within your university and really sort of elevating digital equity work into other community-based supportive initiatives, just keep in mind this covered populations, again, is sort of codified and specifically kind of called out in the state digital equity plan to help direct those funds. Interestingly, too, I don't want this, to be too overwhelming or scary because the main point of this is looking at the percentage of covered populations of Illinois compared to the rest of the country. And you can basically just see how closely it matches. So when it comes to particularly those capacity grant applications to the feds, there's this notion here, and this page reflects that Illinois is the microcosm of the United States as a whole. Therefore, I think Illinois' state digital equity plan is significant just because it kind of mirrors the sort of national percentages and total populations of different covered populations. It also gives you a sense, I think, of just kind of the scale of what we're talking about, of how many people in the state sort of relatively belong to each of the covered populations, just so that people can kind of get a comparative sense of how large the digital equity problem is, I think, and kind of how it's composed, and at least what is the sort of kind of target population that a lot of the funds are seeking to kind of help reduce some of those inequities. Okay, I'm doing my best. Again, like I said, it's hard to cut things. I think all of these things are important, so I appreciate everyone bearing with me with this information. These slides will be made available as with this presentation. So as everyone here should know, in the spring, we did a big listening tour, and a lot of that information went into the digital equity plan. That led to the idea of let's do a condensed, smaller, but more focused version of reaching all these different regions with this tour, which is what the Ready Regional Engagement Tour has been about. It's been disrupted with weather. So part of this presentation is to kind of just make it clear that you are all welcome and encouraged to share this information out as well with any of your partners, particularly in your region, to make sure that they know that they can kind of continue to provide comments on the state digital equity plan until January 31st. I already showed this page, but this is kind of just the general write-up of how it all looks. So I'm just going to breeze through some of these just to kind of conceptualize this plan because it's well over 200 pages. Our staff and the broadband Office of Broadband are doing our best to kind of just figure out how to consolidate and make it most relevant. And so this presentation and these sorts of things are an effort to kind of do that. But this just indicates some of the guiding principles. So again, if anything feels noticeably absent or something very positive, everyone on this call is welcome to kind of jot it down, make a note, possibly submit comments on it as you do so. At the end of this section, I'm going to talk specifically about how to submit those comments and kind of some tips about how to do so. But one of the key things to recognize is that when you do submit comments, you have to identify the section of the plan that you are commenting on. So this bird's eye view page lays out those different sections. And so this presentation is just kind of quickly highlight, not everyone, just a couple of them that are most relevant and most, I think, apt for comments from people. And so again, just kind of keep that in mind too as you're listening to my presentation and considering submitting comments, to be thinking about which section you're talking about or which section you might want to kind of dive into to look at the plan. Everyone on this call is also encouraged to take a look at the state digital equity plan as I'm speaking. You can find it in a variety of different places. go.illinois.edu/SDEP or state digital equity plan is hopefully a pretty easy URL. My staff, I think, will put it in there. It's also obviously on the Illinois Office of Broadband page. There's a very important side link on the Illinois Office of Broadband page called something like federal something. And that contains, the BEAD and Digital Equity Act information, among other important documents. So it'll all be kind of centrally located there for you to go with. I'm just going to pause really quickly and scan through the chat and just make sure that everything looks okay. Yes, it does. And also put a reminder just to anyone from the office or lab on this call that you can absolutely interrupt me if there's anything relevant that someone may need. Okay. Let's keep going. One of the more interesting aspects of the state digital equity plan, again, every state across the country has to submit one in order to receive funds, is the notion of the vision for digital equity. If anyone's familiar with the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society up in Evanston, they have been doing a lot to help coordinate vision statements for different digital equity plans across the country. So this is a perfect place to submit comments. Say Section 2 vision statement, I think, is missing this key component or this key word. So I'm just leaving it up here really quick for people to kind of just see what's in there. It is lengthier than what's on this slide, but again, we're just kind of providing a quick overview for people to see. This is something that our team put together that I also think is just really nice. So this is in the current state of broadband and digital inclusion, which is Section 3, which is a huge section that really gets into what I would say trying to just take a snapshot of where we all stand, where the state stands. So we kind of pulled some of these and kind of put it in a little bit of a flow to kind of see, just so that people can kind of get a sense of where we're at with some of these things. Obviously dive in, take a look if there's particular stats or pieces of information that you would like. We would love to hear that in those comments. Just because I think even if it doesn't make its way into the final digital equity plan going to the state level, I think it's the task of the Office of Broadband and the Illinois Broadband Lab to be responsive as possible to data concerns and questions that people have about the state of broadband adoption rates and digital inclusion efforts. So if we can make any of this information more accessible, easier to use, that's good information for us to know. So this is just, I think, a page that kind of highlights where we're at with the snapshot and what some of those key metrics are that obviously we would want to be increasing and moving towards better statistics and numbers in the months and years ahead. Okay. Many of you may have seen this before, and I'm going to kind of leave it here. And if anybody actually does, this would be where I would start to kind of do that breakout thing. But I think just for the sake of respecting people's time and using this as an opportunity to get as much information out there as possible, we're not going to do. But this to me is a huge piece of data that just gives that snapshot regionally of where folks are. Yeah, so I mean, anyone can kind of, if anyone has any questions at this point or any comments that they want to make, you're welcome to chime in. I'm just going to leave this up so people can kind of soak in and see where their region stacks up as it relates to broadband metrics and percentage of covered population. To me, what jumps out on this is really just kind of the diversity of the state. Obviously, anybody that knows anything about Illinois knows that the northeast part of the state is very different than the southern part of the state, for example, just in terms of geography, racial makeup, percentage of covered populations, what we talk about rural versus urban. Northeast, indicating 0% rural, whereas southeast 100%. But what's interesting is broadband adoption rates, not a huge, gap ultimately, I would say. So southern being our least adopted region, Northeast being the most adopted region, but I think room for improvement on all those fronts. Same with access to devices, and then the unserved, meaning access to 25 down or 3, not ability to pay, but just access to. You're seeing a pretty stark difference, 24%, 23% in the Southeast and Southern region versus 1%, 2% in the Northeast and Northern state line. So I just think this is a really interesting kind of catch-all of just where we're, the snapshot, again, where we're at with all of this. And also just to put in a plug that the office or the Illinois Broadband Lab is working on some more in-depth dashboards that I think will ultimately provide even more information with all of this, with the aim of, yes, kind of knowledge, greater understanding, but also the ability to kind of make more equitable use of resources and understanding, where they should kind of go, given your region's unique challenges with those things. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna keep moving. Again, feel free to jot down any notes for the comments, any questions that you have. If you want to have side conversations in the chat with your team, you're more than welcome to do so. With a goal of somewhat interactivity and engagement with this call. It's here in the in-person sessions that we're trying to do where we would kind of break off and go a little bit more in depth as to regional findings. But because this is a statewide call, we're going to kind of do the little bird's eye view or sort of big picture of what were the themes that emerged generally across every region. So these have their space at different places in the statewide digital equity plan. But this, information ultimately came from surveys, other digital equity plans across the state, such as Chicago's and Cook County's, Lake County, a couple other areas across the state had specific digital equity plans, just to kind of identify what are some of the themes here in Illinois that people are experiencing that make its way into the plan. So again, these slides will be available here, but just to kind of get a sense for you all of, okay, what are people saying across the state? They generally kind of fall into these different categories. What people are saying. I'm guessing, some of these are probably pretty obvious to people. It's on the one hand, digital equity, digital inequity is not that hard to understand in the sense it's kind of
Okay.
historic barriers and things like that, and ability to pay, discrimination, all these sorts of disparities that we see in other sectors. But then also when you look closer, it
Okay.
can be quite complicated with some of these things. Um, just anecdotally, safety online, I think was really a little bit of an eye-opening experience for me traveling across the state in the spring. Obviously, we're used to talking about online safety, the ability for example, teens, children, seniors to be able to use the web safely, to be able to do banking, personal safety, all that sort of thing. But also the safety component when it comes to the internet itself and accessing the internet. And so during the pandemic, for example, in the early months, Wi-Fi, or kind of drive-through Wi-Fi or parking lot Wi-Fi was often heralded and sort of praised, as I think it should be, as an access point to give people that might not have connectivity the opportunity to access essential services. But all across the state, people were saying, I don't particularly feel comfortable being in my car in the parking lot at night at a library. I don't, I wouldn't want my child when I'm not around, sort of being at a restaurant trying to do their homework. So it really underscored there is a very big difference between public access to the internet versus home access, and really underscoring that ability for people to have home adoption of broadband for a variety of different reasons. So that's just kind of something I wanted to share. Just quickly noting the time, I'm going to breeze through this, unfortunately. You'll get the slides, it's all there. But I also want to get to the bead challenge process stuff quickly. So I'm just kind of, again, just using this to kind of show some of the different things that you may want to consider commenting on or telling folks in your community or in your networks to comment on. Section 4 is really about sustainability and implementing the plan. So it outlines what the state is planning to do. So if you have ideas, of, hey, I think the state should spend the money this way on digital equity, Section 4 is probably where you want to be kind of reading and submitting some of those comments. Some of these things, including matching funds and grant applications, low interest loans, technical assistance to grantees. Obviously, we're getting a little bit into the weeds, but I think as digital equity leaders on this call, it's important to just recognize how some of this stuff will be implemented. And then specifically the implementation, Section 5, this kind of is going to be guiding, I think, a lot of the work of the lab and the office from a statewide level over the next several years. So if you have thoughts and comments and suggestions over, hey, what would be great for the state to do is XYZ. Section 5 is probably where you'd want to submit some of those comments. You can see their state and university partnerships. That's where we're at right now, in the sense of the READY program using higher education institutions as a convening role for regional engagement. Timeline again, comments due January 31st. That's the big thing. You are welcome to share all of this information far and wide on social media and others to kind of help generate public comments before it kind of gets submitted in mid-February. The state will then request those digital equity dollars, and then you'll see there the 5-year state digital equity capacity implementation. So this is a long-term component. And then if any practitioners or people that would apply for that competitive grant program with the feds, that would be 4-year thing, also starting kind of 2025. How you can weigh in, this is what it looks like. So you can go to that website, go.illinois.edu/DE plan comments. You can use that QR code. It'll take you to that kind of form page. And then you'll have to kind of identify which plan or which section you're commenting on. And you'll also notice a file upload there. So if you prefer to, just kind of write out some ideas in Microsoft Word, you're welcome to do so. Or if you have an example that you want to point to from other things, you can upload it there. So I just quickly grabbed some just snapshots of what those different sections look like. Again, it's an incredibly large plan, so just making sure you know where you are when you're submitting comments. These are the tips that we like to tell people. Support your comment with substantive data, facts, stories of lived experience, I think goes a long way. Identifying that section number. Try to be clear and concise, I think goes a long way. Suggesting an alternative if you disagree. And then include pros and cons and trade-offs. So again, this is really an opportunity, really the final opportunity as far as the state digital equity plan is concerned until January 31st. Okay, so I hope this provides a good context for you all, what the regional engagement would have been like. We would have kind of broken up, had people make discussions. And so for anyone on the call from the Southeast region or the Southern region or East Central or Northern State Line, where we're planning to get to in the next week and a half, this is a good preview of how that will go for all of you. We'd have this kind of breakout session to help guide some of the conversations that people would have. But again, it can all be submitted right now as I'm talking, even if you want to. I wouldn't be offended if you go over and submit that. Okay, quick time check. I'm going to try to do this in under 8 minutes. So apologies because I'm going to be skipping slides. But I did want to just talk a little bit about the BEAD program. Obviously, it's different than the Digital Equity Act, but it came through the same piece of legislation, the bipartisan infrastructure law. What everybody on this call should just be aware of is that BEAD is about infrastructure dollars, huge amounts of dollars. Illinois awarded over $1 billion. And the goal of the BEAD program from a federal government perspective is how do we close the divide of the access divide for broadband. So those that are unserved or underserved, meaning they have no options to pay or have no options to access to broadband, how do we ensure that they get covered? So it is more relevant, generally speaking, to rural regions or areas in which there is no current broadband infrastructure, though there is a huge chunk related to community anchor institutions and increasing the speeds of libraries. In addition, this mapping challenge process that I'm going to be talking about will be relevant to Illinois beyond the BEAD program. So while there are very narrow timelines for the challenge process to challenge speed tests and location data on the BEAD map, it's not like, one and done. Illinois is going to be engaged in an ongoing process to make sure it has the most accurate maps as possible. So this isn't a flash in the pan component. That the specific limitations of the program, yes, and the timelines, but this will be kind of issues and things to be thinking about in the years and months ahead. Okay. Again, if this was an in-person regional engagement call, we'd spend a little bit more time on this, but I think the main thing that I just want to say is very soon, most likely January 22nd, the most updated BEAD map will be made available. It will have locations, as you can kind of see there, that people can kind of go in and sort of look at and see, and ultimately submit a challenge. So if you are, for example, somebody in a rural area that the map indicates that you have access to 100 down, 20 megabits per second up service, but your experience is much different than that, we would encourage you to take a speed test to kind of challenge that so that your area would potentially become more eligible for the BEAD dollars this upcoming year as Illinois basically tries to close all of those access gaps. It's an incredibly complicated process that we're trying to have it not be so complicated. On the one hand, it's easy, you just kind of do a speed test and test it out, but there's a lot of devils in the details with some of these things. And so it's too much ultimately to cover on this call in a short amount of time. So I'm just going to kind of quickly indicate that there is a role for trusted local organizations to play, which is we have resources that can be printed out to help people submit challenges to the map and get more information. Devin Bronstein, the new assistant director for the Illinois Office of Broadband, has been doing a really excellent job getting resources together and flyers, which I'll point to at the end, to get distributed. But the idea is the speed tests and submitting those speed tests is the most important thing, at least in the immediate future, starting presumably January 29th. But these dates have yet to be totally solidified. The map should be out ideally January 22nd, and the speed challenge window would begin the 29th. So the Office of Broadband and Illinois Broadband Lab are doing our best to kind of make this stuff as clear and concise as possible. So if people have access to write something down or want to visit it right now and bookmark it, dceo.illinois.gov/bead challenge is the kind of one-stop shop to provide information about what's happening with the BEAD program. So you'll see flyers there that can ultimately be distributed that tell how to submit speed tests. The big thing being you have to do it 3 times over 3 different days. They don't have to be consecutive. So that's a little bit of a tall ask, I think, for people trying to do that challenge, but that's kind of where it is. So we have a lot of information on that website, which you can see over there, dceo.illinois.gov/bead challenge. And additionally, there are lunch and learn webinars happening, which I'll talk about in the announcement at the end of this. But it's all there. This kind of goes into that. And again, these slides will be made available afterwards. Apologies for that, for everybody. I'm going to skip some of these things. We are now entering sort of end game of this call. I will leave the last 5 minutes open for questions. I'll stop the recording once I'm done with the presentation so that anybody that has any questions can do so and kind of fill the chat. But before that, I just want to move straight into the final updates and announcements. One of the big ones, Broadband Breakthrough has begun. It's Thursday mornings. You can see the participating counties there, although the Southeast, I think, is a little bit different. I think Jasper is not participating, but certainly Cumberland and Crawford, as well as you can see Clinton, Perry, Logan, and Macon. So this represents the next cohort. So they're meeting Thursdays, and actually the BEAD challenge process is one of the main things they're currently working on, because doing those speed tests with the program. For anybody that doesn't know what the Broadband Breakthrough Program, it's a partnership with Illinois Soybean Association, basically dedicated to how do we get rural counties across Illinois, particularly those that produce soy and corn, how do we get them better broadband using the justification of higher economic yields that farmers and others would be able to do. So it is a 16-week community-driven broadband planning program. It's free for these counties to attend, and they're looking to have another cohort start after this one. But the deadline they're looking at is January 30th. So we would encourage all of you to do as much outreach as you can to any buddy at a county level, particularly economic development people or people that work in infrastructure or broadband within a county, to try to participate in this program. I put 2 reports there. One is from the Benton Institute, literally about the Broadband Breakthrough Program. So if you just search Benton Institute Broadband Breakthrough, you can find that report. And then the Illinois Soybean Association dedicated an entire issue to broadband, and obviously talked about the Broadband Breakthrough Program. So it's an outstanding resource for rural counties to improve their broadband situation. I think we're just at the point of trying to spread the word as best as possible. So please help us with that. Email Bill Coleman at bcoleman@benton.org with any questions, and you can answer. You can also email me and we can kind of talk about it. This slide will be included, which is just all the different people kind of that make up this Illinois Broadband Lab roughly, and everyone kind of working on these different issues. So I'm going to leave this here to close. I'm going to stop the recording in 1 minute, and we'll open it up for kind of discussion and conversation. But the BEAD Mapping Challenge, bookmark that page. There are webinars coming up. So I encourage you, particularly if you're from a more rural area in which you know that broadband infrastructure is a huge problem, I highly encourage signing up for the webinars that are happening at noon. Wednesday the 24th, Thursday the 1st, and Wednesday the 7th. to learn more information, basically just be kept in the loop on all of it. The Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program is still accepting applications until January 22nd. So you can learn more about the DEC program if you want to submit or learn more about that. It's currently being in merit review. There has been one round of awards that have been given out, but it's again kind of in review. Broadband Breakthrough I mentioned. Obviously, there's a lot going on. So the newsletter is the best place. I think it's bi-weekly. So another edition is going to be going out on Monday that condenses everything that we're talking about. And then finally, even though we barely got to it, everyone should know about the Regional Engagement Tour landing page. If you go to the Illinois Broadband Lab website, you hover over community engagement. There's a Broadband Ready Regional Engagement page. That is the most up-to-date thing as we navigate weather and cancellations and where everything is located, as well as slides and flyers for all of that information. So we have about 4 or 5 in-person events coming up over the next week and a half. And after January, basically, we'll kind of reassess and kind of plan the next several months more detailed. All right. Thank you very much for sending this deluge of information. I hope it was helpful for people that had their regional engagement canceled due to weather. I very much appreciate people being on this call. Please email me or the lab if you have any questions. The next statewide ready call is going to be on February 9th. I have not sent out the calendar invite because of the date change, but I will shortly. And everybody on that will get these slides as well as the recording. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop the recording and open the discussion. Have a great weekend, everybody.